Peter Weborg.
Hey, welcome to God's Acre. That's what us Moravians call the cemetery. You call them cemeteries where you come from. We call it God's Acre because this is where we're put to rest after this life on this earth, and that's why we call it God's Acre. And I'm going to say that I'm going to tell you about Peter Weborg today. Peter was born in December 24th, 1823. And I departed from this world on the 1913. So I've been gone a long time. But I also had a wife, Olfa, and she left us in 1888. So a few years after or before I did. But we also had 9 siblings. And only 4 grew up to be adulthood. The rest of them got caught up in an epidemic called cholera and took their life. So anyway, with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more history of the Weborgs, because we were not Weborgs originally. We were called Patterson. Pattersons in Denmark, not Norway, Denmark. And we got named Weborg after the town of Weborg, V-I-B-O-R-G, in Denmark. And then my next kin left Denmark and came to Norway, and we settled in Lom. And that's where I, Peter, was born, was in Lom, Norway. And as I grew up, I learned trades of being a cooper, a barrel maker, and I carried that on through life. And I also was a carpenter. If you can make barrels, you're a good carpenter. Anyway, we went on, and all of a sudden I decided to leave Lom and go to a town called Allistan. And Allistan, as I was growing up, I became known as the town's best baker. And as the town's best baker, my wife, of course, was part of it. There's always a good family's got to have a wife better than a husband. So anyway, we had a good bakery. And anyway, Olafa and I decided maybe you should go take a look at the new world. We should maybe move. So with that, I said, Olafa, I don't know if I want to leave you here with a couple children and all by yourself. And I leave here, don't know if I'll come back. Anyway, you go, she says, and take a look at the New World. So I went through the New World, port of entry in New York. I got on the steamboat, went up the Hudson River up to Albany, New York, and got on the barge and went up the Erie Barge Canal to Buffalo, New York, and jumped on boats, went down through the Great Lakes, and wound up in a town called Fort Howard in Green Bay. And there I ran into a gentleman called Ole Larson. And I and Ole got talking, and Ole said, you know, these Indians have talked me into going up, take a look at that beautiful island up the peninsula. And I said, Ole, well, I'll go with you. Maybe I'll get off before you get to your island. And I did. I got off at Fish Creek. And Ole went on to found Horseshoe Island. And this was in 1852. And I ran into a man in Fish Creek called Increase Claflin. And I said, Increase, is there any fish in these waters out here? Oh, yeah, he said, there's lots of fish out there in them waters. So with that, of course, me coming from a fishing family in Norway, I went and got the rest of my next of kin. And we came over here and settled in Fish Creek. Some went to Juddville and homesteaded in Juddville. Some stayed in Peninsula State Park. And that's where I, Peter Weborg, was in Peninsula State Park. I bought property or homesteaded property at the entrance to the Fish Creek where you see today. I also bought another piece up on Swen's Bluff and then another piece on Middle Road in the park. But I went to Swen's Bluff and built my home. And I maybe was the first lighthouse in Door County. Because up on the bluff, when people were going by boat or walking on the ice, they could see by light, and that was the navigation point for people to go and know where they were at in a snowstorm or the dark of the night. They could always see my light up on Slim Bluff. So I also built a place in the entrance of Fish Creek, and two of my siblings were known as the two old maid school teachers.
Oh.
That was Joanna and Vida. Joanna here is with me today. She passed away in 1930. And Vida is buried in Peninsula State Park, and she left us in 1952. One of the last ones to live in Peninsula State Park. And like I said, they're known as the two old maid school teachers. And out of the 9, like I said, there was only 4 that survived to adulthood. And anyway, Ole Larson, as I was talking with him when I came up from Fort Howard with him, he knew that I had capabilities of building and also a cooper. And he said, Iverson is coming one of these days. I'm trying to talk him into coming to my island and take a look at this beautiful bay that's inside of my island. So 2 years later, here comes Iverson and Onison and another gentleman, and they walked up by ice in February, and they jumped shore cracks. And Iverson was long-legged. He could jump the cracks, but Onison was only a short-legged fella. He couldn't make the cracks. That's all right, Iverson said, I'll pull you across. So that's how they come and knocked on Ole's door on Horseshoe Island. And Ole invited him in, and his wife fed him, bedded him down, and the next morning, in 1853, they went in and founded Ephraim. And as they founded Ephraim, they also founded Ephraim, and then Iverson had $500 from a church in Bethlehem that they were to build a mission church. So with that, they went and got 425 acres here, and that's where Iverson decided to build this mission church. First, they built the parsonage, and he was very, very good because Onison and Iverson and Nielsen and I, Peder, and all got together and we built the parsonage. And then we met for worship. And as we met for worship, we outgrew the parsonage. But it was a big building. It was 36 by 24. And it had a basement, it had a first floor, it had a second floor. But anyway, as we outgrew the parsonage, we then built the church. And not that stubborn Norwegian that Iverson was, he had to have sawn lumber rather than logs. So we had to go to Marinette and get sawn lumber to build the church. And that was the first church in Door County. It was built across from now the Village Hall. And my rendition is that they got their feet wet and they moved the church up the hill to where the present location is today. And you'll see part of it when you finish the rest of your tour today. Thank you for being so nice to me, and hopefully it's been a pleasure to you as it is to me telling you about Peder Weber.
Thank you, Peder. Great job.
Hulda, Augusta, Seiler, Knudson. And I was born in 1878, right here in Door County, up the road a little bit, on the Town Line Road. At the time, it was called the German settlement, and I imagine you can guess that that's because only German people lived up there. You see, the Norwegians who started Ephraim had come here quite a little earlier, and they had all chosen lower land, perhaps because Norwegians liked to be fishermen. Well, the Germans didn't care about that. They were farmers, so they all settled up here. So that's where I grew up. My father and mother had 12 children, and we were a busy household, to say the least. My mother taught all the girls how to be farm wives. My father taught all the boys how to be farmers. I don't think it was ever discussed as to whether we wanted to do that or not. And I had to learn everything there was to know about running a house and a big garden. Imagine with 14 mouths to feed every day, except we almost never had only that many. There was always an aunt or an uncle or a cousin who came for dinner or lunch. We had to have plenty of food available. So we had to learn how to run the garden because the boys were too busy out on the farm. I didn't care much for garden work. It was quite prolific. We had so many fruits and vegetables, and I just knew that besides the planting to begin with, and then the weeding, and then the caring for it, and then the harvesting, then we had to take care of it further, and we had to preserve it. Has anybody done any preserving? Well, for goodness sakes, when you have such a big family, you don't just can about a pound of cherries. You can enough to last the entire winter and spring until the next batch comes. And that took all day just for one kind of fruit. We were terribly busy. Yes, I learned a lot. Did I want to? Maybe not. But I did as I was instructed. We were all good children. We went to school. We learned how to read and write. Some of us didn't get to stay in school the whole time. I was lucky to finish out, but a lot of children had to leave early because they were needed at home. The man I married could only go until the 3rd grade because his mother died and he became the cook in the family at 9 years old. Can you imagine doing such a thing? Children of that era, we thought nothing of it. We did what we had to do. We just went ahead. Well, my husband had never thought that he'd like to be a farmer. His father had a farm, but he didn't care for it. So he went off to the lake and became a sailor on the Great Lakes and made a fair amount of money. So when we became a couple and he asked me to marry him, he said that it would be a little while until he had made enough money to support a family. And then he went off and bought a piece of property on the north end of Ephraim from Aslog Anderson's brother, Halvor. And it was a lovely piece of land on the north end of Ephraim on a big steep hill leading down to the water. And his parents were furious. Why did you buy that silly piece of land? It's a hill and it has rocks in it. You won't be able to have a farm. I doubt that my husband said, I know. But I bet he wanted to. He was not interested in it. So he built a house for us in 1902. We were married in 1903, went to live in that house, and the following summer, he said a good way for us to make some money would be to bake a lot of bread, because there are now quite a few tourists in Ephraim, and there's no bakery until you get to Sturgeon Bay. And so we will probably be able to make a fairly good living, and I won't have to go to sea again. So we started out baking 10 or 15 or 20 loaves of bread a day, and before long we were making 50 loaves a day. That's a lot of bread. We got up very early in the morning and we baked until later at night. But it was lucrative. By the end of the summer, a gentleman who lived next door came to my husband and said, Peter, I think you should open a dining room. We have nowhere to eat around here because the few hotels that there are in Ephraim are so busy with their own clientele, they haven't room to feed us, and we're tired of doing all the cooking all summer. We want to go out, and I will finance it for you. Well, Peter said, thank you very much. That's a very nice idea. I appreciate your offer, but I think I will be able to finance it myself. I will give it some thought. So he came and talked to me about it, and he said, I think if I become a lumberjack over the winter, I will earn enough to be able to add an addition onto our house. And that's what he did. Of course, I missed him for the whole winter, But when he came back with lots of money in his pockets, we knew things were going to work. So he added on a dining room that had room for 40 or 50 people in it to the north end of our house, and he gave it a name. He called it the Knudson house. And it's still there. My family doesn't own it, but it's still there. Well, having a dining room was one thing, but he began to build a cottage or two, or three, or four, or five, and pretty soon we were a hotel too. Well, that's a lot of work. In 1907, my mother was enlisted to be our babysitter because we had a little girl. She was born at an inconvenient time for the tourist season, the end of July, but we managed, and the next year mother continued to come. My brother Johnny would drive her down from the farm every morning, and she would take care of Melinda, and then he would pick her up again after dinner every night the whole summer long. So Melinda, of course, had to learn German, or she couldn't have spoken to her grandmother. It worked out very well. I did have fun with her, even though I was very busy as the cook. Peter and I didn't know we were going to become chefs, but that's what happened. And then we had to have local ladies come and help us. The cleaning was a little bit much for one couple, and also the getting in of supplies and all that cooking. So we had some help that made us a business. That wasn't what I thought I was going to do, but I wasn't a farm wife, and I liked that. I did find time to have fun. Of course, the adults mostly had fun in the winter because everybody in Ephraim was working in the summer. So sometimes in the winter, my husband and my brother-in-law, Arnold Sohns, who was also a fiddler like Peter was, would play music for people's parties. And we had a party at the Knudson house, rolled up the rugs, and in the new dining room we had dancing, and my little daughter, Melinda, sat under a table so nobody would step on her, along with Hollis Wilson, who was the same age. They were good friends. And they sat under there and watched all the leagues going by. And then we found out that the pastor was quite upset. He said in church the next Sunday, "It has come to my attention that one of my flock has had a sinful dancing party. I am grieved." Grieved? We were having a good time. We didn't hurt anybody. We paid no attention. We had lots of good times. Did I tell you about the tea parties that I had for my little Melinda? She wanted to do that over and over again. The first one was quite a success. So she and her little friends would get all dressed up in their Sunday best, and I would put out a little table, child size, out in the yard with a linen tablecloth on it, and I would prepare little teeny cookies and little teeny cakes, and we would have a wonderful time. And you know, those little girls behaved perfectly. They felt that they were being elegant, and then they wanted to do it over again tomorrow. I couldn't do it quite that often, but we did have lots of fun together until in 1920, in early winter, I became very ill. I didn't know what was the matter with me, and neither did the doctor. But I became weaker and weaker, and it became apparent to me that the doctor feared for my life. So I had to come to the realization that I was not going to be here to take care of Melinda for the rest of her life. She was only 12 years old at this time. Oh, so sad. How you can't tell your child that you're leaving her, but you just spend what time you can be with her until the last minute, as close as possible. My sisters all helped. Arnold's wife, Ida, my sister, was always very kind to Melinda, and I knew she would be in good hands with her. And Peter was a wonderful father. He would play with her too, and I knew he would teach her a lot of things, but I didn't want to be gone. I didn't have the choice. I passed away in February of that year when Melinda was only 12. And I felt grieved that I was not going to enjoy the rest of her life with me. But you can't feel sorry for me. I had a wonderful life. I lived in Ephraim. This is a beautiful place. I met lots of wonderful people, as I have done this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you live in Ephraim, Door County, Wisconsin, and your last name is Wilson, most people assume that you must have something to do with ice cream. And in my case, that would be true. So let me tell you how I fit into the whole family situation here. Tombstone says I was born in 1906. I died in 2008. I was almost 102 years old. I was born in Milwaukee, and I was the fourth and last child, 4 boys, born to Oscar and Martha Wilson. My father worked for a candy making company in Milwaukee. And in May of '06, before I was born, my father had a ruptured appendix. Not a good thing today, but certainly back in 1906, that was a real hard thing. And the doctor advised him not to go back to work for the summer, but to find a place where he could rest, relax, recuperate, heal. And so as it would be, my mother had a sister who had moved 6 years earlier to Ephraim, and her name was Tilly Valentine. And so we made the decision as a family then to come up to Ephraim in '06 and to live here for that summer. We rented a place from the Knudson family. Again, another name that is so familiar to the history of this community. We lived down by the water, in right kind of downtown Ephraim. Now, my father wasn't given to just simply laying around and getting, healing kind of thing. He wanted to keep busy, and so he decided that he was going to do what he did in his occupation. He made candy. And then he sold that, and he also then added ice cream to what he offered to people, and that was very successful. And so we went back to Milwaukee for the school year again, and returned in the summer of '07, and again he made ice cream and candy, hugely successful. So we went back again for the school year, and my mother and father decided that it was probably time, it was a good time for them to build a sweet shop up in Ephraim. And so we came back for the summer of 1908, and indeed we built the first of Wilson's ice cream here in Ephraim. There was an apartment above the ice cream shop, and that's where we lived. 4 boys, mom and dad, and in the coming years we made this dance between Milwaukee, Ephraim, Milwaukee. We kept coming up here for summers, and we had the ice cream shop, and it was very, very successful. And finally we made the decision as a family to come up here full time. And when we came up here, it wasn't long before we realized that the apartment above our store just wasn't going to be sufficient for us, and so we built a home just a short ways from the ice cream shop, and that's where we lived for our next years. It was a good place for us to grow up. we had a lot of friends here. My Aunt Tilly had a couple of boys, and so being with the cousins and being with the friends was really good for us. We had a great time. My father wanted all of us as a family to be involved in the ice cream business, of course, and being the youngest of the boys, I became the delivery boy, and I would deliver ice cream to the folks who were out here in the various places around the ice cream shop. Homemade ice cream, of course, packed in ice, and I would deliver that. And I would even take the rowboat that we had down by the bay, and I would go north and I would go south, and I would deliver ice cream to folks that lived on the water, and it really was a good thing. Probably some of the most exciting times for me were when we had the regatta in Ephraim. My goodness, hundreds of people came for that, and I remember setting up a stand to sell ice cream on Anderson Dock, and boy, that was hugely successful as well. That was great. And soon then I went in to work behind the counter, and I did not like that at first as much because I enjoyed being outside, and yet I enjoyed meeting new people, and especially meeting some of the young girls that came in to get their ice cream. And there was one young girl especially, her name was Petie Borg, and we kind of became pretty close to each other, and we would talk, and it was about 12 years after we met at the ice cream shop that we became husband and wife. And so it all started in the ice cream shop in Ephraim. Petie was from Chicago, and that will ultimately come into play in my life some years later. Schooling was an interesting thing. We all went to school up here in Door County, of course, and when my brother Harold, who was the oldest, was to begin high school, there was no high school up here in the northern Door area, so we went down to Sturgeon Bay, and we actually moved to Sturgeon Bay, and we had the school year down there, and then we would come back to Ephraim for the summer again, and we did that for a couple of years, 2 years, until 1918, and that's when the Gibraltar High School was built, and we no longer had to make that move back and forth from Sturgeon Bay back up here. We all graduated from Gibraltar High School, and we all went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we all graduated from the university over there. I graduated with a degree in art, and I loved being on the rowing team. It was a great experience to be on that rowing team. I loved art. I loved painting. I painted in both watercolor and oils, and I did portraits, I did landscape, and I made silver jewelry, and I even made Petie's wedding ring that she ultimately would wear. I made some pewter birds that I mounted them in stones that I got from Pebble Beach, and even drew the attention of Jens Jensen up there in Ellison Bay, and ultimately the clearing. So with my art background at the university as well, I decided to go on to the Chicago Institute of Art, and was hopeful of getting a degree in art from there. But that didn't work out. I realized that I needed to make some money. If I was going to get married, raise a family, I needed to do that. So I was hired by the Evanston School District to start a program of art for the high school there, and I loved doing that. I loved starting that program and teaching the young people art, and probably my most famous student, if you will, is a fellow by the name of Jim Ingerson. And Jim and his wife Phyllis still live over on the Old Stage Road, and he's a wonderful artist, as those of you that may know him realize. But again, they didn't pay well. They in fact paid me sometimes with IOUs, and that doesn't work very well when you're trying to get some money together to start a family. So after 9 years, I left my position at Evanston High School, and I went to work for my father-in-law. He owned a construction company. They built schools, hospitals, apartments, large buildings, and I came on as a troubleshooter. And I would travel to the various jobs and find if there were issues and set about to have them corrected. All too soon, my father-in-law died. Now, Petie and I had lived above them in Rogers Park in a two-flat. We lived on the second floor with the girls, Toby and Holly, and on the first floor, Mr. and Mrs. Borg lived. And when he died, their son became the president of the company, and I became the vice president. It was a good company, and we ran that company for many years. And ultimately, we sold the company. And in 1974, we moved up here to Ephraim and Door County for our remaining years. As you see, Petie died in 2003, and I died in 2008. So from 74 to 08 was 34 years. I lived up here finally in my beloved Ephraim and loved every moment of it. And so it was a great family, a great life, and I thank you for coming and let me share part of that life with you.
But all my life I've been known as Petie, so you may call me Petie if you'd like. I was born in 1913 in Chicago, and I lived for 90 wonderful years. I was born to Emma Peterson Borg and Eric A. Borg. They were both of Swedish descent. I had one brother, Ragnar, but we called him Bugs. So we were known as Petie and Bugs. But we grew up in Chicago with all the wonderful Swedish traditions. My mother, Emma Peterson, was born on a farm in Little Sister, which is just not too far from here. My father, Eric A. Borg, was born in Sweden, and he immigrated to our country when he was 19 years old. He had big plans for himself in his new country, and fortunately, he was able to achieve his goals. He founded the Eric A. Borg Construction Company in Chicago. His company was known for building extremely large buildings in Chicago, mostly office buildings and apartment buildings, and later hospitals and schools. Most of the large buildings were on Wacker Drive. Many you might recognize. As a child, I was able to come to Door County every summer because my mother wanted to visit her family over in Little Sister. Now, by the time I was old enough to come every summer, the farm had become the Little Sister Resort. But the barn still remained there. And that was wonderful for me because I loved horses. What little girl doesn't love horses? Nothing better than being on the back of a horse. The only problem being that our horse was a retired racehorse. Well, that made it very difficult, if not impossible, to ride with my friends because we always had to be at least a nose ahead. I had a lovely childhood, and one thing that we are so thankful did not actually happen was, when I was quite young, two teenage boys, thinking my father probably had money because of his business, they laid plans to kidnap me for ransom. Can you imagine? I didn't think much about it when I was a child. Fortunately, the whole plan was averted. Adults had found out and notified the police. But as an adult, I thought, what a terrible thing. When I had my own beautiful girls, Holly and Toby, I just couldn't imagine anything so bad. As
as I grew, the one thing that went through, the thread that went through my entire life was the love of music. My parents realized when I was quite young that I loved music, and so they provided me with piano lessons. And before long, I was able to play all of the classics. The other thing I loved to do was to compose music. I never dreamed that my music was as good as those composers of which I played, but I continued to do it throughout my life. And I didn't like to perform for anyone but my family and for myself. After I graduated from high school, I went to Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, and it's still known as a wonderful school for performing musicians. I continued to come up here during the summers as a young adult, and all of the young people would gather down at Wilson's Ice Cream Parlor. Perhaps you've heard of it. Well, one of Mr. Wilson's sons, Hollis, used to work behind the counter, scooping ice cream. I was quite taken with him. He was so handsome. Well, he liked me too, and we became an item, and eventually we married. We married in 1937 and then went to live with my parents on the north side of Chicago. At that time, Hollis was a very wonderful art teacher at Evanston High School, and he loved teaching art, but he knew that he was never going to make much money as a teacher, so he went to work for my father and my brother in the Weborg Construction Company. They built a house for us in Glenview, which I'm very proud to say I designed, and they also built a house for my brother Bug. So we were able to be close to family, and we remained in Glenview until we retired here after Hollis took full retirement. At some point, he had bought a plot of land for us right over here in German Road, just around the corner, and built a lovely home for us there. It's now owned by a young couple who have named it Hollis House, which I think is just perfect. So in the summers, Hollis would bring my mother and myself and our two girls, and we would summer here. And he would come on the weekends, which was a very long drive from Chicago in those days. But bless his heart, he made it every weekend. I had many friends, but my very best friend was my sister-in-law, Kay. Kay Wilson was married to Hollis's older brother, Carl, and he would come on the weekends also. But Kay and I would spend the weeks with our children, and we'd talk for hours and hours. She was the treasurer for the Peninsula Arts Festival, and the whole association had a project, and they decided they would love for it to be music. Well, Lorenz Heisey, who lived also in Milwaukee and in Ephraim, had a friend and had heard of Thor Johnson. Thor Johnson was a very well-known up-and-coming conductor. He was the youngest American conductor in the United States. At that time, he was conductor of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. When Lorenz talked to him about bringing classical music to Door County, he thought it was a wonderful idea. And he said that he would gather the music, he would hire the musicians, and they would come and perform if only we could raise $10,000. Well, in 1951, $10,000 was a lot of money. But after many meetings and much fundraising, we were able to achieve that goal, and we had the first music festival on August 6th, 1953. At that time, it was a chamber orchestra, and it was made up of 34 people. However, in time, it did become a full orchestra of 64. Thor Johnson was able to recognize extreme talent, and he brought many wonderful soloists to Door County. Many of those soloists went off to become internationally known, but they were able to stay with us because they'd only be here a few days of the summer, and they enriched our family life just wonderfully. we would go out into the woods and get pine boughs because we were trying to cover up some of the items in the gymnasium. We didn't have the beautiful auditorium that we have now, of course. However, in time we did. But we printed the programs, we gathered the advertising, we did so many things, and it has been a success. I understand they just had their 65th season. So if you've not had the opportunity to go to the Peninsula Music Festival, it's a real treat, and I suggest you do it. Hollis and I retired to our home over here on German Road, and then belonged to the Moravian Church. And we are so glad that we had the opportunity to spend our last years here in Ephraim. Thank you so much for coming.
To the Historical Foundation. You're going to hear first from Helen Sohns and then from Warren Davis. And they're going to explain their relationship and the role that they play.
And indeed, hello. This is a beautiful day in 1949, July 1949. My name is Helen Hepner Sohns. I was born and raised in Maplewood, Wisconsin. I was born in 1911 to a large family. I had 7 brothers and sisters, and I took the train to school every day to Algoma, and then I took the train again to school to Algoma Teachers College, and I graduated with a teaching degree. And my very first school was Stevenson Pier. Stevenson Pier is a little school south of Sturgeon Bay, and there were 56 students in that school, and it was a one-room school. I loved the children in that school, and I was there for 2 years. Then one day, 3 stately-looking gentlemen walked into my classroom, and they said, "Miss Hepner, please dismiss your students. These gentlemen would like to speak to you." And it was our county school superintendent, Kenneth Visti, and our Ephraim school board president, B.D. Thorpe, and another school board member, Dr. William Sneeberger. And they said, "Miss Hepner, we heard that you are a very strict and wise, but yet a wonderful teacher, a young teacher, and we're wondering if you could come and teach at the Ephraim one-room school." And I said, "I can't do that. I just signed my contract for next year, and I can't break my contract." "Well," they said, "we'll give you a nice raise if you do that." So I went back and I talked to my school board superintendent, and he said, "Take the job." I had a hefty raise, and I motored to Ephraim happily in the fall of 1934 with my brand new 1934 4-door Chevy. And there I boarded at the Evergreen Beach Hotel with the Hoganson family. And I spent a wonderful year. Well, maybe not so wonderful. It was quite challenging. There were some little angels, and then there were some real troublemakers. And I found out later just why they wanted me to come and teach. The troublemakers were the doctor's son and Mr. B.D. Thorpe's son. Now, I endured all their harassing. I should tell you funny stories, but at any rate, they finally stopped harassing me, and I had some wonderful years teaching. one day in 1937, one of the 8th grade boys, who was quite a troublemaker, his name was Glenn Sohns. He was in 8th grade. He came to me and he said, "Miss Hepner, did you know you had a flat tire?" Now, you know, and I know, that they let the air out of my tires deliberately. And Glenn said, "My brother will come up and fix your car, your tires. He likes to tinker with old things." And so I said, "Of course, sure." And I played along with him. Well, he was setting me up on a date, on a blind date. And from that day on, I was a proud resident of Ephraim for the rest of my life. And I grew to love the village like my own. And I was a part of the village. I, of course, couldn't teach anymore because I was a woman. And if you married, you weren't allowed to teach. So in 1938, when we got married, I just became the storekeeper's wife because we owned a meat market and a grocery store. So time went on, and everything was good at the school. I was on the school board, and then all of a sudden one day my life changed as I knew it, because I heard a new school was being built up on the hill on Norway and Kew. And this was also going to be a nice, beautiful one-room school. And the Ephraim school was going to be demolished if it wasn't purchased within a month. Now, folks, I had dreams for years that we could preserve some things in Ephraim. We all knew the Anderson dock was starting to crumble for the 4th time, and we knew that the Anderson family couldn't afford to fix the dock anymore. And I had visions at night. I couldn't sleep at night because I wanted some of these historical places to be saved. So, and you want to know how much the property in the schoolhouse would cost for all of us to pitch in and buy it? $2,850 for the property and the school. Now, I had nowhere to go but to my dear friend. Bill and I met so many wonderful people being in the store that there were so many great summer people that became our friends. And one of those people was a man by the name of Warren Davis. Warren was known for his keen mind and also his kind spirit. And he had helped many people take care of business in and around Ephraim. And he was such a good friend of mine, I decided I had to go and see him because the building only had days before it was going to be demolished. And I'm so happy that I could come and see you, Warren. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful.
So wonderful to see you.
You would meet with me today. And I want to tell you, I just haven't slept for weeks because I'm so upset about the demolishing of this school. And just think, if we could do something together, put our heads together, and appeal to the school board one more time and the village, and start something, start an organization, possibly something nonprofit, and we could become members of, and we could grow, and we could start saving our old beautiful places in Ephraim. Can you hear me? No? You can't? Okay. And so that's why I'm here today, to see what you think about this.
Well, I'm so glad you came to me, Helen. I can see you're very distraught.
Very.
I've known you for many, many years, and I've never seen you like this. You're usually very happy-go-lucky and smiling all the time, and I can tell. I'm just really... But anyway, I would love to be able to help you, and I agree with you that I think one-room schoolhouses really need to be saved. There are not many of them around the country left. And I don't know if you remember, my two boys, Warren and Bob, went to school there too one fall.
Yes.
So our family has wonderful memories of that schoolhouse too.
Yes, and these buildings are becoming places like rare covered bridges. How many covered bridges do you see? And that's what's happening with schoolhouses. I just pray that something can be done by the end of July.
Yeah, well, I think that's possible. As we're talking, I'm thinking already about a list of people, mostly summer residents who have money that I know how to sell people on an idea.
Yes, you've had great
So,
experience.
I think we can do this. But I think your job is to go back to the school board and buy us enough time that we can collect the money that we need in order to buy the schoolhouse. And once we do, then I think we could work on forming this organization so that we have something to manage the property for perpetuity.
And, Bill and I will be happy to chip in because if everybody would put in $100 or $200 or $500, we'd have that money in no time and we could purchase that building and property. So you would count us in.
Well, count me in, and I'll make it happen. I'm known for making things happen, so we can do this, Helen.
All right. Well, friends, on July 19th, 1949, several people in the village came forward, and we saved the schoolhouse. Bill and I also helped. I could not sign the bill of sale because I was a woman, but he did. And then Bill and I became committee members, and we co-chaired a committee to furnish the building. And then Warren Davis's wonderful daughter-in-law, Nancy Davis, and I became the curators of the museum. We were about to open the museum in 1990. And I died in 1988. I did not get a chance to see the new museum. But I did have in my possession all the old school documents dating back from 1859 that were given to the Ephraim Historical Foundation. But now, Warren, I'm not finished with you because I haven't heard how you came to Ephraim. Your family has deep roots here.
Well, thank you. I would love to tell you the story. My name is Warren Davis. I was born in 1900, but the story really starts with my father, Robert, who was born in eastern Kentucky, and at the ripe old age of 14, he left home with just an 8th grade education. He found his way and ended up in the booming city of Chicago, and he went to work for a company called the Goodrich Steamship Line, and they operated ships up and down Lake Michigan from port to port, delivering freight and people because that was the cheapest and easiest way to move them at that time. One of those ships was called the Carolina, and on its route were stops like Sturgeon Bay, Fish Creek, Ephraim, and Sister Bay. And my father was chief passenger ship agent, knew these towns. He was on board almost all summer going up and down all these ports. And he fell in love with the Ephraim. And so he decided to leave his family, like a lot of other vacationers from the big city. We stayed at Stonewall Cottage, which later became known as the Anderson Hotel, and now Anderson Condominiums. And we would stay for about 3 or 4 weeks, and we also ate our meals there, which was typical. The American plan was room and board, because there were no restaurants other than the hotel where we stayed. So when I came, I could barely walk. I was sort of a toddler like this. Afterwards, you can come and take a look at a picture of me. I'm in this photograph. I'm the little guy on the left in the arms of Everett Valentine, who was a local. And Ephraim in those days was very different. First, there was no electricity. Back home for me in Oak Park, we had electricity, and it's been there for a long time. There were no paved roads, just gravel, and we hardly ever saw any motorized vehicles anywhere. In fact, you were more likely to see a cow roaming down by where Wilson's is, which incidentally started about the time I was 6. So the town was just a wonderful place for me. In the ships, the Carolina, I remember vividly because I was being a little tiny tyke. remember coming into town on that. And every week after we arrived, I'd go back down to the dock and watch on Tuesdays at noon. The Carolina would come in like clockwork, and I could remember hearing the horn blow as it left Fish Creek, and then you saw the smoke from the smokestack as it rounded Welker's Point, which is the point of land that's out close to Horseshoe Island. And as it got closer, I was just overwhelmed by how big this ship was. And I said, how can that ship ever come into Anderson Dock? And it was hard. It drew 13 feet, so they had to constantly dredge it. And the dock at that time was longer than it is today, but the boat still stuck out beyond that. It was 220 feet long. Anyway, when it's secured at the dock, then locals who had been visiting people or on business someplace would debark, and so did the vacationers coming with their luggage, and the men started loading and unloading shipments coming and going, and people just watching, like me. I was just started to watch people. It was wonderful. So those years as a young boy were really very memorable. But at age 12, my life changed in terms of Ephraim. My father decided to leave the Goodrich, and he formed his own company and built 2 steamships of his own that offered 1 week-long vacation cruise ships on the Great Lakes, going from Chicago to Duluth to Buffalo and all the stops in between. And I had a summer job on one of those ships, but we never came back to Ephraim because those ships were way too big for Ephraim. We never came back as a family until later in my life. And then when I was 17, my father died at the age of 44 from pneumonia, and I went to college at Beloit College and graduated. And I took a job in encyclopedia sales. And you can smirk all you want. I did it on a dare, but I surprised everybody and myself that I was really good at it. And I did so well, I was president of the company before I was 30. 1924, I married my sweetheart, Marguerite Morency. She lived 2 blocks away from me in Oak Park, where we grew up. And everybody called her Miney. She was the youngest of 9 children, and because she was the youngest, she was a little possessive of things, and she'd go around grabbing things, say, mine, mine, mine. And so her older siblings started calling her Miney. So to the day she died, at the age of 84, she was called Miney. Nobody knew what her real name was, Marguerite. 1928, I was fortunate enough to buy some land from Dr. Stevens on North Shore Road and built a cottage out of logs from an old barn down by Sevastopol. Loved that house. And I didn't think about anything remarkable about building it at the time, but here I am, 28 years old, and building a house, and I did not yet own a house in Chicago. I had three children, and I rented a house for them, and I did not own a house for another 10 years. That's how much Ephraim meant to me, to have a house first in Ephraim. And it's a good thing because the market crashed the next year and kind of life changed for a lot of people. But I held on to the house. At the bottom of the Depression, I was able to buy a defunct encyclopedia company and began to grow my business. In the late 30s, I took up sailing and became an avid sailor and owned several large sailboats during my lifetime that I moored in Ephraim and Chicago. And I like to cruise with my friends and family. And because of that, I became a member of the Great Lakes Cruising Club, which is a relatively new club, and they were gathering information about all the ports. And so I kind of jumped in full tilt and helped them build a database on how boaters can safely get in and out of the harbors and what kind of services were there. And that information is still updated and published today, and very proud of that. I became Commodore of the club, and there's a plaque commemorating my service hanging on the south wall of the warehouse on Anderson Dock. It's hard to see amongst all the names painted on the building, but it's there.
Rob?
Yes?
What did you have to do with the yacht club?
Well, my boys were becoming of age, 12, 13, and I thought they should learn how to sail. So I helped Malcolm Vail assemble a fleet of 18-foot long Seagull sailboats for the Ephraim Yacht Club. And my boys participated in racing and sailing and became quite active there. And I'm really pleased to hear that that yacht club is even more active today than I ever thought it could possibly be. So the next jump in my story is 1948, when Helen came to me about buying the schoolhouse and forming the foundation. You know, so I'm about 50 years old, and my boys, Warren and Bob, are now getting married and starting families of their own. To my joy, they both come and join me in my business and start having my grandchildren. So by the time I died at 60, I died from cancer, I had 10 grandchildren, and it was just the cream of the crop of a wonderful year, a wonderful life. The doctors had no way of fighting cancer at the time. I knew for 2 years I was going to die, but I couldn't be a happier man, having a healthy family, a growing business, and lots of friends, both in Chicago and up here, who love Ephraim as much as I do. So thank you for coming and listening to both of our stories. And we both hope that you, if you don't already love Ephraim, that you do pretty soon. Thank you.